Welcome to the Art of Procurement podcast with your host, Philip Eidson. Here, thought leaders share the trends, strategies, and tactics that you can use to elevate the role of procurement and your career.
Hi there, everybody, and welcome to this week's Art of Procurement podcast, which is powered by SIG. I hope that you're having a great week so far. The voice is starting to come back, so hopefully it's not going to fail me as I kind of go through today's pod. And there's actually going to be two parts to today's podcast. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about the idea of stepping back and challenging things that we do every day, or the things that have become what I thought of terming generally accepted procurement thinking. I won't be seeking to suggest we're doing things wrong, that's for sure, or that things need to be fixed, but what my intent is really to help us all collectively kind of get the creative juices flowing. And then second, I want to share details of a new procurement podcast that we are publishing here at Art of Procurement. And that one is hosted by SIG CEO, Dawn Thurer. I'm going to go into all the details at the end of the show, and then I'll play our most recently published episode in its entirety. And it features the Vice President of Procure to Pay at FIS, which is Fidelity Information Services, Wayne Easel. So as I've shared on the pod, and you'll have read about on our weekly newsletter, I've been thinking a lot about our role in challenging the status quo, or of making an impact, by catalyzing change, by being a catalyst. And I've had a number of conversations over the past couple of weeks, really since I started focusing more on this topic. And as I mentioned a couple of moments ago at the top of the show, about the things that we kind of accept as being either the way of doing things or the go-to strategies that we accept as being the right way to solve a problem, without sometimes reflecting on if there's different paths to reach similar or maybe even more impactful outcomes. And so as I started to question this, there was a number of activities or beliefs that, I've always kind of held as a truth that come to mind. As I thought about those, again, it wasn't really in the context of, we've got to change this, or isn't it stupid that we do this, but more, I wonder if there's a different approach. And I don't necessarily have the answers for what an alternative approach could be, at least right now. And this isn't the show where I wanted to give a number of steps to solve a particular challenge. But what I did want to try and do is really spur some thinking. So collectively, are the facts that we hold dear, are they actually fit for purpose when we consider our desires to be catalysts for our organization, our desires for the future impact of the procurement function? And, do we need to kind of lead by example by taking a step back and reflecting on the things that we do, in our day-to-day work? And one of the things as I think about that, what's really important to me is having the mindset to kind of challenge what we do in search of other approaches. Again, rather than saying, here's 10 things we should fix, taking that step back, kind of reflecting and thinking, is there a different way? Or should I be approaching a particular challenge in a different way that's maybe a little bit different than my go-to strategy and my go-to response to a particular issue? So this is really some food for thought. As I put my head together, I came up with some practices or facts that I just thought are worthy of being challenged. It's quite possible, because I know that listeners to the show, you're all very progressive in your thinking. It may be that you've already initiated new ways of being and of thinking into your teams and the way that you operate. But with that all being said, I'd love to kind of hear what you think. And I came up with, I actually had a long list of different areas that I could have talked about, but I really wanted to focus on three. And again, it's not necessarily because these are the three that I think are things that we really need to think about differently, but just to give them as examples of perhaps how we could think differently and approach issues with a different mindset. And these were just three that came to mind. And the first one, and this is in no particular order, is the value of supplier consolidation. And as a benefit, the powers of economies of scale. I've long had a love-hate relationship with supplier consolidation. I've come across more than a couple of CFOs and consultants who really believe that supplier consolidation is the cure of all ills that they may be seeing. That, by cutting the number of suppliers that a company works with, big numbers, 50%, 75%, that by doing that will significantly reduce the spend or significantly reduce the company's risk profile. And I don't disagree that there are often good savings to be had through supplier consolidation. It's been a go-to strategy for me, for sure, at various times in my career as a category manager. But in doing so, I didn't usually take a knife to the supply base. It was more about strategically consolidating a supplier here, a supplier there, because that was just the right thing to do. What I would challenge us to consider is the question, what is too many suppliers? It's a question that we often seek to answer through benchmarking, as an example. Company X in my industry has 3,000 suppliers, and I have 25,000 suppliers, whatever that number may be, and therefore I must do everything I can at whatever cost to target having 3,000 suppliers. But for what reason? Why is that something that we do? To reduce transaction costs, for sure, although I sometimes wonder if that's overstated, but there is obviously some kind of transaction cost reduction in having fewer suppliers. To reduce risk, maybe, although I would argue that that's not always a given. And then to reduce spend, again, sometimes it does reduce spend, but the reality is that the methods that we often use to reduce the number of suppliers and reduce the tail actually comes with an increased cost that actually offsets any cost savings. And so that's where I think about economies of scale. I've experienced a lot of success in reducing costs through supply consolidation. But again, as I mentioned before, it's kind of when I think of consolidating 5 medium spend suppliers into 1 or 2 large suppliers, or 3 large suppliers into 1 or maybe 2, but with bigger spends. Because at that level, volume really matters. Fixed costs, cost to serve, investments, they can all be amortized by a supplier over much larger volumes when you're talking about big numbers. And they may be willing to effectively buy business in service of building a stronger position in a market. They want to buy business essentially from their essentially from their competitors, because it just positions them in the market in a way that helps them in future pursuits. So there's a value of them from doing it. But when it comes to, I think, what we look at more traditional supply consolidation, where the tail comes in, it's consolidating 10 very small suppliers. Maybe they $100 spend to $10,000 spend, whatever it may be. We consolidate those 10 really small suppliers into one slightly less smaller supplier. When we do that, to me, the benefits are fewer, or at least they're less obvious. And the cost of implementing it from a people, but also change management and a political capital perspective, it can be significant. As can any compliance efforts that we need actually to put in place after the fact to make sure that that tail spend and those number of suppliers don't start to grow again as soon as you're not looking. What I think sometimes gets lost is, what's the negative impact of supplier consolidation? Are we then becoming an innovation roadblock? We're impeding perhaps a stakeholder's ability to experiment with suppliers or to iterate on different ideas. Are we eroding trust by forcing a supplier consolidation? Once an experiment, for example, with a small supplier has been proven. So we've worked with a small supplier, we've got something to market, and then we decide, we need to consolidate suppliers, and those suppliers that are the smaller ones that we worked with actually then get swept up in a consolidation effort. What does that do to our position in the market when we want to try and encourage small, innovative suppliers to work with us? On the flip side, are we creating monopolies that by consolidating suppliers, we're actually introducing more risk, as we now have a single point of failure? And an additional consideration, I think, for larger suppliers, I know it was something that I would have to think about in the automotive business, is that by consolidating suppliers, in an industry where there are very few buyers, am I actually taking a supplier out of the market completely? Because, maybe they only have 3 or 4 buyers left to sell to. If I'm kind of consolidating them, taking them out of my supply base. So again, creating monopoly, but of it being of our own doing. So as I said at the beginning, it's not to suggest that supplier consolidation is something that we should not have in our toolkit, but it's just one example of something that I think we hold dear in terms of strategies and approaches we pursue that perhaps we need to challenge the assumptions behind it. Do the assumptions we make actually hold up? Do the benefits hold up? are there more effective ways to manage tail spend, as an example of what a lot of supplier consolidation does, in a way that is different from what we've done before? The second example to challenge, and I'm actually pretty sure this is something that we all know as a fact, it's just that we sometimes struggle to operationalize the concept, is that the cost of a deal, or the spend with a supplier, or the spend within a category itself is equal to the importance of that deal, the importance of that supplier, the importance of that category. Even though I think that we all kind of appreciate this concept can be a little bit of a fallacy, most of what we do, and when we think about supplier segmentation, for example, project wave planning, resource allocation, which suppliers to target as part of supplier relationship management, which stakeholders to focus, a lot of what we do, the primary factor of segmentation, and thereby the importance that we allocate, is actually associated with spend. And of course, we also mostly use spend as a proxy for importance due to our metric being savings, and the need to demonstrate that hard savings-based ROI that is really easier to get by doing a smaller number of large projects. And I don't really intend here to solve that challenge of our performance metrics, but the fact is that, for at least for a mature procurement organization, the big spend items that are needed every single year, we've long optimized those for cost. Sure, there may be other ways of looking at the spend. There may be opportunities to take a % or two out, but I really just want to encourage us to consider challenging that bias towards going after exclusively big spend items, or only allocating a strategic resource to a lower dollar project when it's really in an attempt to win over a new stakeholder, to build a new advocate. What I want to suggest is that, most of the development work going on with suppliers to form what will be future revenue sources for your company or sources of competitive advantage, those start as smaller, lower dollar projects. But the impact that we have on those projects, it could be many times, what a 1% or a 2% saving on a larger spend item or a larger spend supplier could be. So if we challenge that bias, how can that inform how we think about which initiatives to engage upon, rather than just seeing them as, oh, that's a nuisance, it's a lower dollar spend project. Now, the fact that we're always resource constrained, might mean that we require some pretty creative thinking, or that we carve out resources and allocate them to kind of platinum stakeholders. That's a phrase that Google uses, but stakeholders or initiatives or areas of the business that are actually involved in future growth initiatives. They may actually be quite small right now. It could even be some of those moonshots, but it's areas that the money necessarily doesn't reflect the strategic importance of those areas of the business. And so we're specifically focusing on those as opposed to, again, seeing them as just an opportunity to build a stakeholder relationship. And much like supplier consolidation, I use this just to demonstrate the opportunity to challenge our biases, as we look for areas to be a catalyst of change. And the last assumption I want to challenge, or question, that I wanted to explore today, is that we often tend to assume that stakeholders have an inherent desire not to work with us, not to work with procurement. It's certainly a position that I found myself in. For whatever reason, we come to a spend category where we have not historically been engaged. There may be that a stakeholder started a project on their own. They brought it to us just at the end to finalize the contract. I think that's something we're all pretty familiar with. Or it may be that we're having some discussions with a prospective stakeholder to engage and to help them engage with us, that maybe those discussions just don't seem to be going too well. And I don't want to suggest that it's easy to get stakeholder engagement, because we all know that it's not. But what I wanted to put forward, again, to challenge those assumptions, is that what if we approach those conversations from the perspective that stakeholders want to work with us, but they're just looking for a compelling enough signal or a reason to do so? So would that perspective change our approach? As I think about what that could mean from an actions perspective, would that mean that we invest more time in preparation rather than showing up to a meeting and trying to use kind of what we typically do to sell a stakeholder on the procurement value proposition? What if we invested a lot of time upfront to understand exactly what was important to them. Are they cost constrained, or perhaps they're just not sure how to get what they want for the budget that they have, to achieve the results they need to achieve or the outcomes they're trying to drive with the budget they have. Maybe they're time constrained, from a personal time management perspective. They're just running around. They need some help. They need some help to take things off their plate, but they're not really that concerned about cost savings. Or in terms of a speed to outcome from a business perspective, they have something they want to drive quickly. Do they have challenges that they're not sure how to solve in the supply market? So they could be looking for us to bring market insights and bring knowledge of emerging solutions. Or on the flip side, they may know the market inside out, but they just want somebody to act as kind of the foil, the bad cop during negotiations, so that in their mind, in their perceptions, they're not damaging the relationship and the working relationship that they need once an agreement, once a contract is signed. So I found that just that change in mindset, how can I seek to understand reasons that would compel somebody to work with me as a procurement professional, focusing on that rather than selling them more generally on the procurement value proposition. Because we're going from a point where we think we're taking the mindset they want to work with us, but we got to understand what it is that we can bring to them, as opposed to here's all the wonderful reasons why you should work with procurement, and hopefully one of those sticks and resonates enough that they see that as a reason to, okay, let's work with you. And I've just found that to be so much more effective. Now, again, I wanted to pose these questions today really as food for thought. Of course, I recognize that every day it can be a scrap. We spend so much of our time firefighting, even despite, our best intentions. I don't want to suggest that these are things that we do wrong, but just use them as examples to think of, if we take a step back, would that change how we react to an issue, how we plan our time, how we say no to things, which strategy we pull out of our toolkit, which area of focus we dedicate the majority of our time to. Those are really some of the things that I want to address in the coming months on the show, both through the podcast, but also through our This Week in Procurement newsletter, which we've really taken a complete look at kind of how we're communicating and what that newsletter is all about. So just a plug, if you haven't already checked that out, I'd love for you to go and check out our newsletter. And that's just at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. And so it's in the reflecting, the exploring, the learning, the sharing, and not being afraid to challenge those things, which we, I think, instinctively pursue, that we instinctively, the way we react, the way we behave, that really offers us an opportunity to change the game. Okay, welcome to part 2 of this week's Art of Procurement podcast. Strategies. And so with that in mind, I'm delighted to share with you the launch of a new podcast. So the Sourcing Industry Landscape, it's hosted by Dawn Turer, the president and CEO of SIG. It's going to be focused more on disruption. So it'll feature conversations on the sourcing industry landscape with innovators who embrace technology to improve, to influence, and to inspire procurement professionals. Dawn's interviews, they're typically going to run about 20 minutes, with a new episode published every other Wednesday. And so, as I mentioned at the top of the show today, I thought I would actually share with you the entirety of an episode at the end of today's podcast. And so the guest on the show that you're going to hear is Wayne Easel. Wayne is the Vice President of Procure to Pay, and Procure to Pay at FIS, Fidelity Information Services, actually encompasses sourcing, contracting, accounts payable, expense management, and travel services. And so in his conversation with Dawn, Wayne offers some actionable advice to anyone who really aspires to succeed in procurement through tactics like learning to listen to your clients to understand their needs, and being curious and being inquisitive so that you're actually able to provide some unique solutions. Actually goes back to some of the things we were just talking about before, and to really immerse yourself in specialized courses and training to learn what best practices are and really to become a subject matter expert. And so if you're interested in subscribing to the Sourcing Industry Landscape, it's actually be within its own feed on iTunes or whatever your favorite smartphone podcast app is. So you can go there, search for the show, which is the Sourcing Industry Landscape, and hit the subscribe button. Alternatively, you'll be able to find the shows on the Art of Procurement website. So each show will have its own show notes, similar to what we do with Art of Procurement in the Art of Procurement website and on our feed. You can also go and subscribe to the Art of Procurement newsletter, and that is at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. And then in our This Week in Procurement that we send out every week, I'll just include a link whenever a new episode is published. So with that all being said, I'll hand it over to Dawn and to Wayne.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is Dawn Tura with Art of Procurement, and I'm so excited to welcome Wayne Ezell. Wayne Ezell is a Vice President of Procure to Pay at Fidelity Information Systems. And Wayne and I actually go back a number of years. I've known him for probably the last 5 to 8 years of his journey. But Wayne has a great story to tell. So, Wayne, thank you for joining me for Art of Procurement podcast.
Yeah, it's great, Dawn. Thanks for inviting me.
So, Wayne, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you went to Arizona State University, so of course you'd be in sourcing, but you didn't start off in sourcing. My understanding is you were going to be a physicist.
Yes, yeah. So exactly. And I can recall back in high school, that's where my passion for physics really started. I had one of those kind of crazy physics teachers that everything he did just kind of rubbed off, very positively, to students. And so that's really where I got my passion, starting off. And so when I went to Arizona State University, it only made sense for me to actually have, my career or my trajectory go into physics. But unfortunately, after a couple years and then just completing quantum mechanics, and just saying that still gives me kind of a cold sweat, by the way, I didn't do so well in that course, and I realized then I just lost the fire, really, quite frankly, for physics. And I started questioning myself whether that was the major that really was going to be for me. But what I can do is I can vividly remember walking the halls in the business school at Arizona State University, and I noticed this very small sign, and it said purchasing and logistics. And, we've all walked down business schools before, and we see accounting and marketing and finance, right? All the traditional ones. And I saw this little tiny one, and I thought, well, I'll duck in there and see. And what a life changer it really turned out to be. And that's really where I met a mentor of mine that has been my mentor for the last 28 years. His name is Art Jacobs. He was a professor there, at Arizona State. And he really single-handedly put the fire or the passion back into my heart for all things procurement and purchasing and supply chain management as it was starting to become. And so really what he described to me was that, supply chain really is a function that needed thought leaders. And really it's from all disciplines and all majors, but really specifically what he focused on were people that could see this big picture. And really this guidance still holds true today. And, I can still recall a lot of the sessions I've been at with you and the other leaders that are at SIG that, really they talk about that. They talk about the big picture. And that's really what we get in the procurement world is we get to understand that big picture. And so anyway, 2 years later, I finished my degree and I had a purchasing logistics major, and it's been great.
That's fantastic. And, there's nothing wrong with having that hard science background, that physicist background and physics background, because it's so good to be able to apply the analytics. But somehow through your journey, you picked up the people side as well. So from being, in physics and wanting to be a physicist to being such an amazing sourcing leader, where did you pick up your people skills? Well,
I think it probably, I probably should give credit to my mom and dad. They probably put a lot of seeds, into my history for that happening. But really, we all have an innate slant to what our behaviors are. And what I found is that really we become some of a byproduct of our work environment and our school environment. But I can still recall of the different jobs I've had where I've had to play different roles, and so sometimes it really puts us in maybe uncomfortable positions at times, where sometimes you're asked to be called an analyst, And guess what? You're like, well, I'm not really an analyst, and I don't really know Excel that well. And we put ourselves in these kind of uncomfortable situations. And so, what I've done over my career, for the most part, is I've thought about the areas where my blind spots are, maybe where I'm not so strong. And this might be a little tangent on your question here, but for example, I also have a master's degree in finance. I never would have done that had I not seen the link between analytics, finance, budgeting, international in procurement, right? And so we get all those things in procurement. And I said, well, look, that's a blind spot for me. I really should address that blind spot. And that's really what I did by getting that master's degree in finance. It wasn't something that I said, that was my desire, but it fits so nicely into all the things I even do today. And as you know so well, procurement organizations a lot of times do fall under finance. So it helps that I can kind of talk the talk as well.
It sure does. But when you started off in semiconductors, is that correct?
I did. I started off in semiconductors, and I evolved through healthcare, through insurance, and through finance.
Wow, those are very dramatic, different industries. But when you were at one of your early semiconductor companies, you said that you had to spend a little bit of time on the road with the sales folks as well. Can you tell me how that experience has parlayed into understanding the supply base a little bit better these days?
Yeah, absolutely. I do know that in my very first job, like a lot of us in our first job, we're focused on the task, right? We're focused on just kind of what's in front of us. But I had an opportunity that I got to meet a number of suppliers with the very first company I was with. And one of those suppliers actually hired me to be their purchasing manager.
Wow.
And in that role, it was a small company, about $100 million, and 40 people or so. But it gave me a good appreciation, a real good look at the whole supply chain. And so, it's a smaller supply chain, but it gave me a good understanding of not only just performing what an internal salesperson was asking. There, we had 7 or 8 different salespeople, and they would come to me and they'd say, "Wayne, I need this for this client. Can we source it? And then we're going to put it in our solution, and then we're going to sell it to them." And a lot of times, probably the first year, I would do that. I would just kind of take their word for it. But then what I learned was going out to the customer site and actually hearing firsthand from them what they wanted, what they needed. Was very beneficial for me. And so it was great for me to now see all the things that I was doing from a procurement function for the internal sales group, what they were trying to do for the end user, right? Ultimately for our clients and our customers and the consumer. And it really gave me an appreciation, quite frankly, of the value that we bring in procurement to an organization. In this case, it was small, but I can extrapolate it now into, being in a $10 billion organization like we are here at FIS. We are very, very important to the supply chain for an organization. And that's really where I saw firsthand that, look, I'm making an impact on the customer. I'm making an impact on the client. And I got an understanding then of profitability, margins, time, making sure that we got things to them at the right time as well. So it gave me that good appreciation and really solidified that, look, this is the right field for me. Whether we call it supply chain or procurement or transportation, logistics, direct or indirect, there's that value that we bring to the organization. And as I've mentioned to others in the past, there's really a couple of different ways we manage money in an organization. You either manage it by earning it or you manage it by spending it. And so, us procurement folks, me included, we just happen to be those reverse salespeople. We just happen to do it on the buy side.
And that's great. So, but you also, when you describe, the skill set that a modern procurement person needs today, we often say they need sales skills. So do you think that you learned a lot of that and you brought it to your teams in the years since you did support the sales effort?
I would say yes. There was a tipping point there where I could have easily went into sales. And when you're younger, I was in my early 20s at the time. There's more money in sales than there is in operations, right? So, and that's okay, and that's great. But I would say that I learned to become a very good listener during that period of time because I had to. And I think that's one of the skills I learned the most was being able to learn, but listen to what the clients were saying and then be able to repeat it at the same time. That really was a valuable lesson I learned.
That's great. So what made an impact on you to say, I'm going to stay in sourcing all these years and through all the evolutions and such a dramatic change that you've seen in our industry? Why have you stayed?
Well, really, I guess it's more, the value that, again, that we're bringing to an organization. Really there's, to me, I get a chance to inspire, at the level that I'm at today and just all the progressions I've been through, I get a chance to inspire others. I get a chance to set direction. And I get to do that every day. And so I get a chance to either, help people in their careers and help inspire them where we're going as an organization, where we're going at for a procurement organization, or I can have a chance to, not do that, not earn that trust for them. And that's really what really drives me today is that, we have mission, we have values, we have culture, and I get to make a very large impact on that. And that's what really continues to drive me.
That's great. So where you are today, is this a global team that you manage?
It is. We at FIS, I probably should take just a moment here to describe FIS. We're Fidelity National Information Services, and we are a finance and technology services company. We support banking, institutional, and brokerage. And we have hundreds of products and services, and we support 20,000 customers. One of the examples I like to give is that we produce a lot of credit cards and credit card statements. And so there's a fair chance that, credit cards that people use listening to this today or any of the credit card statements you get, you're probably getting them from FIS. So don't hate us for that. We're doing that on behalf of a bank in large respects. But we're number one in our industry as well. And we're represented in 130 different countries. And from an international perspective and global perspective, we have any and all categories, whether it's EMEA, APAC, or we support all those regions. And we have about roughly 500 million or so of spend outside the United States. So it's rather sizable. And specifically for my team, what I found is very valuable is that we have embedded procurement individuals and professionals in each one of those locations as well, because they're close to the customer, they're close to the client, and they're able to, understand their needs, but also coach them on what we're doing from a procurement perspective.
So before your latest transformation, you were at USAA out of San Antonio, mm-hmm. and I know Kevin Nash had brought you from American Express to USAA, and you left mm-hmm. San Antonio to move to Jacksonville, Florida. Tell me, what inspired that move? Was it to get your own global team? What really was your inspiration to move?
A large part of it was, I think, a change in responsibilities. And so American Express is a great company. I was with American Express at the time. That's where I had a chance to meet Nash, and he was able to, he was my leader at American Express. He hired me there, and then he went on to be the CPO at USAA, and then Kevin Nash hired me there as well. But really what it turned out to be was, it was a change in scope. It was a change in responsibilities. The team maybe was a little bit smaller, so it wasn't from that perspective. But what it was is I was able to take a lot of the skills and knowledge that I had with other organizations, and I was able to use that at USAA. And what was interesting is that USAA was a private company. That was attractive to me, and so they didn't have to think quarter to quarter. They could go year to year, and then go even multiple years on a project or a program or initiative. And so there was, and on top of that, the mission statement at USAA could be recited by 98% of the 25,000 employees.
Oh my goodness!
Heart. Okay. And so, and I'm sure Kevin has probably mentioned some of that to you before, but that was very, very unique. And I'm not saying that at American Express we couldn't do that or we couldn't do that anywhere else, but there was just a unique culture, to USA that just really was a pull, to me. And sometimes you just feel it in your heart and you just know it's the right thing to do.
And then you got recruited and then you end up in Jacksonville. So tell me, so now you've got an incredible global team. So tell me, what do you think makes a successful procurement, sourcing, supply chain person?
Well, I think first, one of the most important is we just can't stop learning, right? We have to make sure that we're continuing to evolve. And I know you've preached this many times, and we're listening to you, Don. Quite frankly, we hear you on it. But I'll kind of give you my experience, with this as well, is that what's really important is that we, in any job they're in, whether it's procurement or anything else, but we have to show an interest outside of our own, and so I can recall when I was with the semiconductor organizations early in my career, I took specialized courses in learning what a semiconductor was. How to speak the lingo, how to understand the terms, how to understand trends, and those types of things. And that was important, and it went a long way in giving me gravitas with others I spoke to, but then also with our customers. And then when I moved into financial services, it was different. I mean, all the things technically, who really cares about a microprocessor and how it's built and what that really means? But in financial services, I started working with mutual fund experts and investment bankers. And so I thought, well, look, I need to change it up here a little bit. So I took a certification on mutual funds and became a certified mutual fund specialist.
Oh my goodness!
And so that didn't mean I was going to go out and sell mutual funds or for anybody to take advice from me on mutual funds. But what it did is it helped me understand how that part of the company actually made money. It was one thing to hear it, but it was actually better to see it, from a mutual fund perspective. And then, just a couple other examples. We did a lot of outsourcing at some other organizations I've been with. And at the time, it's okay to learn on the job. It's okay to learn as you go. But what I found was I became a certified outsourcing professional to bring rigor and best practice to the outsourcing events that I was working on.
So now you have an insatiable curiosity that you have continued to learn. How do you get your team? Is that what you search for in people that love to learn, love to stay up to speed? Because, that's what we need to do. But how do you impart that on your team and inspire them?
Yeah, each person on my team has an individual performance plan just for themselves, for a professional. And so, for example, if someone is working in the space of market data, we buy a lot of market data. We'll look for, yes, we buy a lot of market data. And so for example, if someone's working as a category manager on market data, they will look for courses or seminars or trade magazines to learn more about market data. And so it's part of their review, and we make it a percentage of their review, so they're incentivized, and they take time to spend on looking for that specialized training to help support them in their categories.
That's great, because so many times we meet sourcing people that don't know what they're sourcing, they don't know how to talk to the business units, and what you've demonstrated through what you have done with your own career is that you've been able to relate to the people you're working with, and you're not doing sourcing to them, you're doing it with them by having a common language with your own internal business units. So kudos to you, because you don't see that very often. So if we were to talk about a single strength for a person going into sourcing today that you would say would be absolutely critical, don't go into sourcing unless you have this strength, what would you say it would be?
It's very easy to say thick skin, right? Because, quite frankly, there's, whenever and we're a supplier, we're all, it's like a food chain. We're all a supplier to somebody, and so, there's a lot of suppliers that just aren't going to see it your way. A lot of clients internally that aren't going to see it your way as well. But, I think really and I mentioned, listening, earlier, and that's really very important. It's really, listening, I think, is a core skill for us. But really, another part or aspect to this is providing something unique to our internal clients that maybe they haven't gotten before. And that can be in the form of category plans. We talk about category plans till we're blue in the face. Okay, for 20 years, I've talked about category plans. But they're not the same in every organization. They don't, they're not cookie cutter. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times what an internal client wants is they just want someone to understand them. And so I think really it's the ability to want to learn, the ability to want to listen and understand, and really understand someone's business. It's someone that's inquisitive as well. So I know you're asking for one, and I'm not going to give you one, but it's really listening, being inquisitive, and having the want to learn.
I love that. And it's been really neat watching you and your career, and you've become such a respected leader within sourcing, and people are looking up to you. So I'm glad that you're giving them that kind of advice. So if we were going to leave it with one personal thing about you that maybe we don't know about you, can you give me some little nugget?
Yeah, I used to be kind of embarrassed to talk about this, but I'm not, because I'm really proud of it, quite frankly. But I had an opportunity to, early in my life, my mom and dad supported me in a lot of sports. And one of the sports that really stuck with me and earned me a scholarship to college was bowling. And so actually I have a scholarship to Arizona State for bowling. And so maybe, the physics or the supply chain management and purchasing wouldn't have happened at all, right, if it wasn't for bowling. But for a number of years after leaving college as well, I was a regional touring pro on the West Coast. And it's a good thing I didn't try to make my living at that, because I would have been dead broke, quite frankly. But it was one experience I had, and really, if it wasn't for that, I don't know where my career might have ended up, quite frankly, and just an amazing experience. But it's been wonderful to be part of the bowling community, and every organization I go to, they love to have me on their bowling team. So.
Oh, I bet they do. So hey, when we're in DC, our Thursday night event is going to a fun bowling alley / bocce ball / bar music center. So you're going to be the ringer.
All right. I can do all three of those things. So
you're going to be the man that night. So Wayne, I want to thank you so much for joining me for the podcast, and I hope that we can meet again for 2.0 and check in on what you're doing, and maybe a year from now. And I just really have enjoyed watching your career take off and seeing the leader you've turned into. So this is Wayne Ezell, and he's Vice President, Procure to Pay at Fidelity Information Systems. So, Wayne, thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. But with that, I'm going to wrap this up. This is Dawn Tura from Sourcing Industry Group, or SIG, and I look forward to hearing you and seeing you at an upcoming event. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of The Art of Procurement. To find an archive of all past episodes, you can go to artofprocurement.com/episodes. And to ensure you never miss another show, go to artofprocurement.com/subscribe.